Hi guys, I'm Judy Elmore and I'm a freelance editor with Black Wolf Editorial Services. For the past several weeks, we've been talking about various different aspects of writing and editing. We've been looking at the stages of editing. We've been looking at some of the tricks that I use, show versus tell, depth of perception. And today, I want to talk about pacing. It's actually an incredibly important aspect of writing because if you don't get your pacing right, your story is actually quite boring to read. Pacing is incredibly important and probably more important than what people realize. It defines how fast or slow a story is actually read. Your pacing will help build your tension within your story. And the most important thing is without appropriate pacing, as in changes in how it goes, your readers won't be engaged. It is just as boring to read a story that is all action and lots and lots of fast pace as it is to read a story that's incredibly slow and has nothing going on. They're both just as boring. You need a balance between the fast moving and the slow moving reading to keep your reader engaged. Pacing itself impacts on multiple different aspects of writing, and this is why it's such a big topic. It impacts on your overall story structure, your transitions between your dialogue and your narration. It also affects your paragraphing and your sentence construction, as well as your transition between chapters and sections. So let's look at some of the more complicated nitty-gritty ones first. Let's talk about pacing through sentence construction. Well, your punctuation and your paragraphing, the way you break up your text, will actually define the breaks that your reader will take when they're reading it. Where are they going to breathe? I heard very recently from a person who does audiobooks that whenever they see a comma, they take about half a second break. Whenever they see a period or a full stop, as it's called in some countries, they take 1 second. And if they see a paragraph break, it's 1.5 seconds. So you get this longer breaking between each of the sections that you're reading. You can use this to your advantage, putting emphasis on different words. When you're looking at punctuation and paragraphing, it directly impacts the speed at which a passage is actually read. But it's counterintuitive. It doesn't work the way you necessarily think it does. If we were to take a series of short sentences, now remember it was that, for every full stop or a period, you get this break of about a second. Well, here's the thing. A series of short sentences, it takes longer to read it, but yet it gives this feeling and impression that you're racing, that you are trying to get to the finish line very quickly. Now that's an important thing to know if you are working in a fast-paced section with high tension and lots of action. Your fight scenes, or dare I say it, your on-screen sex scenes will use this mechanism. Very short, sometimes single-word sentences to get across your point. The longer sentences can actually slow your pacing. They give your reader a bit of breathing room. Now, these longer sentences may not have any commas, but you still have that slow way of reading it and trying to capture everything in. And so that's important to understand when you have big, long passages. That's what happens. However, to totally confuse things, a run-on sentence can actually give you this tumbling or breathless feeling, like you were out of control and that you cannot carry on. A good way of using this, if you are going to use this in your fiction prose, would be tumbling under the waves. If you're caught in, say, a tsunami, or for that matter, you're caught in an avalanche and you're just tumbling, you don't know which way is up and you keep rolling and rolling. That is what the run-on sentences is great for. Would I use a run-on sentence any other way? Probably not, but it is something to keep in mind. Let's take an example. Now, this particular example is as published in Jules Verne, Journey to the Center of the Earth. It is, let's look at this from multiple different ways first. If we look at it just from an aesthetic point of view, like we're actually reading it on page, that's a lot of words. That is Yeah, that's a sea of text, and it's really hard for me to understand where the sentences are. And if you actually take a good look at this, there is actually only two sentences here. It is divided up by semicolons. And yeah, there's only really two sentences, and that's just a bit overwhelming for most people to read. In fact, I don't even think I want to read this because it's that overwhelming, but we'll give it a go anyway. To his misfortune, my uncle was not gifted with a sufficiently rapid utterance, not to be sure when he was talking at home, but certainly in his public delivery. This was not much to be deplored in a speaker. The fact is that during the course of his lectures at the Johannism, the professor often came to a complete standstill. He fought with the willful words that refused to pass his struggling lips, such words as resist and distend his cheeks, and at last break out in the unasked for shape of a round and most unscientific oath. Then his fury would gradually abate. Okay, I got tongue-tied so many times in that, and I apologize. Yeah, that was not nice to read. Don't get me wrong, I love the story of the Center of the Earth, Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. I totally adore it, but yeah, it was definitely written in a different time, and this is quite obvious. So let's rework this. Before I get into reading this, I want to point out the paragraphing. Just right away, because of the difference in the paragraphing, and you've added in different sentences and the different construction, and we've changed things around, it is suddenly simpler to even look at. You can see where things are going to change. I have slightly reworked it, but it is pretty much still the same flavor. To say that my uncle was not gifted with the eloquent tongue would be an understatement. Sure, when he was at home at ease, the words flowed easily, but in public, during the course of his lectures at the Johannism, the professor often came up to a complete standstill. Words would resist and distend his cheeks, refusing to pass his lips, stammering, flustered, only to break out in some rant of unscientific confusion. He was a deplorable public speaker. Do you see how just that breaking changes the emphasis of what it is you're trying to look at? And that's what you're going to be playing with within your writing. Pacing through chapter breaks. This one's quite an interesting topic because every single time you come to a paragraph or a section break, you encounter a point where a reader could potentially put a book down. That could be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. Sometimes you want to give your reader that break. Think about, when you're at the theater and you're going to see a show and they have the intermission. It's like, I need the toilet break. Quick, mad dash, run. Oh, great, there's a cue. That's basically what you are doing in some cases within your stories. You're creating that instance where they can actually go to the toilet break. They can take that break. Or for that matter, they can maybe go and refill their cup of coffee, or who knows. Sometimes you want them to keep turning the page. What's going to happen next? And you want to keep it going. So it's an interesting balance on how you're going to work it. There is no rule about chapter length because it actually depends on the genre expectations and your writing style. There is one idea, okay? You keep your reader reading until the wee hours in the morning. It is so satisfying as a writer when somebody says, I couldn't put the book down. I had to keep reading. That is so cool. And trust me, it's really satisfying because it tells you that you got the engagement there. This is quite common in shorter forms of fiction, but it's also common in high action type of fiction. In things like thrillers, your chapters tend to be of that shorter form. They are in the order of about 1,500 words or shorter, because I have actually seen some that are in the order of 400 words, 1 or 2 pages. But each of those chapters will end on a cliffhanger where you're like, uh-oh, what's going to happen next? Oh dear, uh-oh. And the type of sentence they might finish with would be, he had the gun to my head. Okay. Instantly you go, what? Is the MC going to die? Who? What? I gotta keep turning the page. And that's what this type of pacing will do. The second school of thought is that you want to give your reader a nice break point. This will be more common in the longer forms of fiction, particularly if you're dealing with epic fantasy or science fiction, where you're dealing with manuscripts that could easily be in the order of 150,000 words or more. I've seen some fiction novels that are literally a doorstop of a book. George R. Martin, here we come. Let's divide your book into two because it's that big. In this sort of case, you are dealing with longer chapters in the order sometimes 3,000, maybe even 4,000, sometimes 8,000 words in just the chapter. But as a consequence, that chapter will come to a conclusion of sorts. It won't end the story, but it will end that section of the story, that little piece of the adventure. It creates a resting point so that way your readers can actually go and get some sleep, so they're not reading through blurry eyes. It is allowing them to actually carry on with their life work, but yet you've left it in such a way that they do want to come back and they want to carry on reading because they want to know what's going to happen next, but they don't feel like, oh no, she's got the gun to her head, what's going to carry on? It's like, no, they've ended that particular section of the adventure and we're ready to go into the next phase. The type of sentence that they might end with would be, we sat down and went over every detail of our plan to ensure we had thought of every foreseeable outcome. Well, your characters are taking a break. Time for the reader to take a break. And that's basically what you're going to be doing. Then there's a third school of thought. Use a mixture of both. This is my preferred option because you have to have that balance. You sometimes you need that break because you just need the break. And sometimes you want to keep your reader going. But it's a matter of balance. For those who work with me as mentoring clients, I try to encourage the writers to use this method of pacing through chapters. Sometimes you want to keep it going, sometimes you need the break, and it's understanding how to pace it out so they can work that way. Pacing around dialogue. It is a completely different idea again. What people need to understand is that when you come across a long section, you skim over it. So if you are reading a long passage of prose, most readers won't actually read it. They'll read the start and they might read the end and they'll glance over the middle and they'll pick out odd little words here and there, but they won't necessarily read the entire bit of prose. They are after the dialogue. And when they come to the dialogue, they slow down. And the reason why is because the dialogue uses paragraphing rules that create a collection of short paragraphs. And they're often only one or two sentences. Remember in our example where we had those paragraphing breaks, we could suddenly see where everything was. And that's what you're playing with within dialogue, is you're seeing those paragraphing breaks, you're seeing the white space around the words, and the next thing you know, you're actually wanting to read the dialogue. The amount of action or tagging that you use around your dialogue will actually impact on how fast that dialogue bounces. If you come across a passage that is literally one line said by one character and then flips to another and then flips back and then flips back and then flips back, that is going to ping pong between the two different characters. You do run the risk of readers not knowing who's saying what, but if you are after a fast-paced bit of dialogue, having no action tags and no dialogue tags will create that fast ping-pong motion of the dialogue bouncing. We are now a society that really craves movies and TVs and the visual form. And as a consequence, as writers, we need to encourage that within the written form. And dialogue sections are actually the closest that you're going to get to the movie form in a written form. And that's why readers tend to go for it. They want to read the dialogue. So why exclude it? Or at least that's my feeling. However, there is a caveat here. You need to be extremely careful when you are putting accents into your dialogue on your written work. The reason why is because your readers will stumble over uncommon spellings or unknown words. If you try to do, V instead of we, they're going to look at it and go, what? Okay, you can obviously hear maybe it would be somebody who's coming from a Scandinavian type area, maybe German, maybe Dutch, I don't know, but we don't recognize those words, and it's going to stumble your reader, it's going to throw them out. I really don't recommend it. Just be aware of it. Okay, let's talk about pacing over story structure. There is the traditional 3-act structure, and let's face it, a lot of people use the 3-act structure within their story construction. The first act being 25%, the second act being near on 50%, and the last act being near on 25% as well. And as you can see, it's almost a 4-act structure as well. And there is a very good reason as to why this works. Within the first act, you are looking at your setup of your story. You have the introduction of your core character set, you have a definition of your premise. You also have your inciting event, and that's all going to lead up to the first point of no return. This is a point where your characters have to make a decision one way or the other, and if they don't do it, then you don't have a story. The thing that's interesting to note is that within modern fiction, the first act is not necessarily 25%. It's getting shorter and shorter and shorter. I've actually seen some books that have the first act compressed into the first chapter. That's pretty impressive, and it's a testament to the writer's skill, but it's the way things are going. Would I recommend doing it? You know what? It depends on your story, because maybe you need that longer setup time. In Act 2, you're going to define what are the problems. What is in the way of your characters achieving their goals? You're going to have the chase or the fun and games, and this is where things are going back and forth, and sometimes it can be fun, sometimes it can be a little bit not so fun. And then you're going to eventually get to this point in the middle, and it roughly is about the 50% mark, where it's this mirror moment where your protagonist is forced to face their decisions and their actions, and they have to make a decision again. In a way, this is a point of no return again, but it's not really, because they're already on the path. It's just the fun and games are no longer fun and games. The fun and games are over, and you are really into it. Near the end of Act 2, you'll come across the dark moment. And this will be the point where all is lost or all things are bleak. The mentor has died, and oh no, what are we going to do? They have to do it on their own, and it generally is just before the end of Act 2, because at the end of Act 2, they have to make a decision to fully commit or walk away. It's your point of no return too. Then you have your storm the castle moments, and that's like leading up into your final battle. That's where things all come to a head, and everything is just completely, in some respects, out of control, and your protagonist has to do something about it. You're going up against your big baddie, and that's it. You're leading to that climactic point. After that, you've got your resolution, and you're tying up your loose ends. Exactly how much time you have between your climax and your resolution will depend on your story. I have seen the climax sometimes being, second to last page, and you have one page of resolution. I have actually seen that. I've seen it where the climax is midway through this third act. There are so many different options there. If we were to take a look at Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, you actually have this full structure, which is based on the 3-act structure. You can see at point number 6, you're breaking into 2, which is your second act, and at point number 13, you're breaking into 3, that's your third act. So you actually have your 3-act structure sitting here, and he's also got the midpoint, so there's the indication that it might be even a fourth point. But there's very distinctive things that he suggests that should be present in every story. Do I agree? Don't know. Do I disagree? Don't know. What I do find interesting is that you have that dark moment. So the dark night of the soul, as he calls it. It's your dark moment. It's the moment where everything's lost, is roughly around about that 75% mark. And it is just before you go into Act 3. And that's what I find really interesting. I like the fact that Snyder also suggests mirror images for opening and final images. I think that's pretty cool as well. There is more than just the 3-act structure. Just look at all this. You have the traditional 3-act structure. You have a 4-act structure, a 5-act structure, and there's 3 different ones sitting here. 7 acts, 8 acts, 14, 15, 17, 18, 22. Yeah, okay, there are so many different story structures out there. It's just a matter of finding which one works for you and your writing style and the type of story that you want to tell. Pacing out a story. We can pace out our paragraphs by looking at the way we're doing our paragraphing and the way we're doing our sentence constructions. But when we're looking at actual pacing out of a story and the plot, it's a bit more complicated. In the previous video, I was talking about editorial synopsis. I think it's an incredibly valuable tool to use when you're looking at this sort of thing, because you can see exactly where all of those points fall within your story. You can also use beat sheets. Now, beat sheets will go back and look at, for example, the Save the Cat had particular beats that had to happen. There were 15 of them that were on that beat sheet. And you had to hit certain marks, and they had to be within a certain percentage or a certain word count of your story. So by X number of words, event A, B, or C has happened. This is quite common within romance to use beat sheets. I've also seen Westerns use beat sheets as well. If you are interested in a variety of different beat sheets that you can get, go take a look at Jamie Gould's website. She actually has a whole bunch of them that you can download. I also think you need to look at how your character arc progresses in conjunction with your plot arc, because that will actually impact on your pacing of your story. What is happening with your character? When are they being challenged? And when are their viewpoints being challenged? Because that is what people do. People start reading a story because of the plot, but they continue to read the story because of the characters. So your characters have to have some sort of arc. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a positive growth or change, because there are other options, and that's a topic for another day. But by understanding where all of this fits out, you're dealing with the pacing of your story. In our next video, we are going to talk about even more editing tricks that I happen to use within editing. We're going to talk about the backwards edit in particular, and we're going to talk about what I call the top and tail edit. That video should be available for you in the next couple of days. In the meantime, if you have any questions about today's topic or any of the other topics that we have in the What Next series, feel free to drop me a line, and you can contact me on Twitter, and that's at blackwolf_ed, or you can find me on Facebook, and that's Black Wolf Editorial, or you can contact me through my website, and that's blackwolfeditorial.com. Alternatively, if you are interested in my personal projects, you can contact me on Twitter, and that's at Judy L. Moore, or you can contact me through my website, and that's judylmoore.com. Meanwhile, I look forward to helping you take your writing to the next level.